Welcome back for another episode of Best Pod Available. Joe DeLeone here with Ryan Roberts. Today we're going to talk about the interesting discussion of which teams need to trade up to draft a quarterback in the 2026 NFL Draft. Ryan, I think that this discussion is a compelling one. Before we get into the four teams that we want to dissect, the reason why we're having this conversation is because of the way that this class is shaped. There's not very many non-quarterbacks that are worthy of the first overall pick. Orville Reese is in the discussion, but a lot of these other top guys play positions that are just not players that you take that early. The quarterback class is two players that we're going to debate for the next couple of months, Dante Moore from Oregon and Fernando Mendoza from Indiana. Ty Simpson's going to be in the fold, depending on how he finishes the college football playoff, but not in the top two discussion. So therefore, we're in this spot where there's not a lot of options, and there's shockingly a lot of teams that really, really need quarterbacks. We've got four teams here that we're talking about, but I don't think that it's just limited to the four teams that we're bringing up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a supply versus demand conversation, right? There's not a huge supply of guys that potentially are going to be. I hate the term franchise quarterbacks, just kind of in general. I don't like that terminology as well. I'm going to say two guys in this class that potentially could be plus high-end starters if they hit in the right system. Like, we'll kind of coin it that way instead of saying franchise quarterback. Because for me, like, that sounds like they're a savior. And I don't know if either guy is necessarily a savior, per se, in the specific situations. But I do think that they're going to demand the demands of NFL teams because of the supply and lack thereof. I mean, at one point in this class, Joe, we thought when Ty Simpson started making his ascension, we're like, okay, maybe he's a top 10 pick. You're still talking about Lenore Sellers earlier in the season as a guy that maybe could potentially be that guy. You're talking about Brendan Sorsby as like a dark horse first-round pick to early second-rounder type of guy. You're talking about John Mateer earlier in the season. Like, there was guys, it seemed, early on, but obviously we've seen Sorsby most likely going back to school, John Mateer pooping the bed down the stretch of the season, Lenore Sellers going back to school. That lack of supply is going to make teams, I think, get a little bit desperate, potentially, for either Mendoza or Dante Moore, potentially.
So at the time of taping this, we're taping it on Friday before the Giants play the Raiders, and neither of these teams are. We're going to have a talking point about the Giants at the end of today's show, but we're not really talking about here the Giants and the Raiders because depending on the outcome of that game, it impacts who has the first overall pick. Raiders lose the game, and they could still very well be positioned to take the second best guy of the mix and be content and be happy and be effectively in a really good spot. Therefore, it opens the door for the Giants to be able to command a gigantic trade market for somebody to jump all the way in. I wrote a story on this not that long ago on A to Z Sports of, what is the recent history of these quarterback trades? What does it net a team in the circumstance if the Giants were to sit? Let's start by talking about the Cleveland Browns, though, because they're hovering around this top 5 spot. If they're in a position after the season's over where they cannot get a quarterback because they're hovering around that 5 spot, do you think that they're a team that must trade up?
Yes, I think they're the one that makes the most sense, like logically, and I think that they're the one that should absolutely, because here's the situation you're in, Joe. Kevin Stefanski, not sure if he's going to be the head coach long-term after this season because of the couple stinkers in a row that he's had. I know that he's had a longer leash than some, considering the Cleveland Browns effect of, like, it's hard to win in Cleveland, at least in recent history. But I still think that Stefanski could potentially have a opportunity to be let go this offseason, it seems, right? And if he does, I think there is a credence to new head coach, fresh blood at quarterback conversation. And unfortunately for Shedeur Sanders, who showed some flashes early when he became the starting quarterback, it's been downhill since then, right? So he's had a few clunkers in a row, and you only invested a 5th-round pick into him. So you're not going to mortgage potentially taking a quarterback in the top 5 that you love for Shedeur Sanders. You're just not going to do it. You're not doing it for Dylan Gabriel, obviously, for the most obvious of reasons, right, of a 3rd-round draft pick. So I think that they are a team that should consider trading up, because also they're not a team that's picking at 9 or 10 where it's going to take a crap ton to be able. I think it's just a crap for the second time on this podcast, which is But it's going to take a lot for a team to go from 9-1 in instance, right? For a team that go 3 or 4-1, that's not a crazy amount of draft capital. It's still going to take some, obviously, but it's not this daunting jump of 8 to 9 spots that's going to be like crazy, crazy, crazy draft capital. So the fact that you are close in the conversation, I think is important. I think the fact that you don't have a quarterback and you might be turning over the regime of a new head coach potentially. So if you love Fernando Mendoza or you love Dante Moore, I think it could be beneficial for you to trade up, Joe. The problem is, though, on the other side of it, though, if I'm the Giants or I'm the Raiders, let's say they end with the top 2 picks, I would rather trade with a team that is further back because as long as it's not like you're not trading into the 20s, but like if I'm the Giants and a team picking at number 8 overall, let's say compared to the 4, I'd rather trade back to 8 in this class because I'm going to be able to get more and more draft capital and you still get a top 10 draft pick. That's where the eeriness of this whole conversation starts with, but the Browns should absolutely try to make this happen if they can.
Yeah, well, I obviously with the nuance of that aspect of it, like, of course, the Giants are going to want to try, if the Giants are the team that are in that spot, that they're going to want to try to leverage whoever's going to give them the most. The opposite end of that is, and there's one team in particular that we're going to talk about, I think would be the best option for that circumstance. It might be too expensive to even consider doing it. But specifically with the Browns instance, them and the Jets, we're going to get to in a second, have to be considered the most desperate because they've swung and missed recently on quarterbacks. The Browns, more specifically the Deshaun Watson interaction of swapping him for Baker Mayfield, set them back incredibly far. Decided not to go in on a quarterback early last year. Shedeur Sanders has been solid, has played better, I think, than the 5th round billing as you would expect,
Sure.
But to your point, if you really, really love Mendoza or you really, really love Dante Moore, you can't just keep going into the next offseason without finding some sort of a resolution. I think that this specifically is a team that, as much as they might be closer to competing because their defense is so good compared to some of these other teams that are in the mix. I mean, Myles Garrett's unreal.
Sure.
If you could convince yourself, hey, if we go and get a veteran and we want to think that we can win right now, I think that you have been so far down this line that trying to go by that approach is far too risky. If you invest in Kyler Murray or you go and get Mac Jones, there's really not very many good moves for you to go and make. I don't know if there's like a Geno that's an unknown veteran that's available, that could become available in the future. The current state of this team not having a young playmaker to develop around and build the roster around is setting this team back. The fact that they have not resolved this in some time, I mean, it's not even just the Deshaun Watson, it's having Baker and then that not working out. And then before Baker, it was decades of not having a franchise quarterback. You need to make that move because you have put yourself in this position of non-competitiveness because you still haven't found someone.
I don't think that this is a team that can try the veteran quarterback route just in general. Like, even if it's a team-friendly quarterback conversation, like you could bring a guy in to be a bridge to your young quarterback potentially, but you cannot go all in on, I don't even know what the hypothetical is, like a true veteran quarterback that has still some stay power in terms of trying to compete for a playoff spot.
Tua.
Tua would make zero sense for the Cleveland Browns because while their defense is, while you're right, Joe, their defense is good. Absolutely. It's a very good unit. Again, you might be dealing with a new coaching regime, and while that defense is very good, the offense is horrible. And it's not just the quarterback spot. Like, this isn't I think of like Ben Roethlisberger when he got drafted to Pittsburgh back in the day, Joe. They had Tommy Maddox at quarterback, and it was like legitimately Pittsburgh was a quarterback away from competing for Super Bowls. Like, they were so close. This is not that team. They need to fully rebuild this offensive line. They need to add weapons at wide receiver. Like, this is not a one-off season, flip the switch, you're a quarterback away from potentially making a huge jump in production. Like, you need to find 2 offensive tackles. You need to rebuild the interior of the offensive line for the Cleveland Browns. You need to get several pass game weapons outside of the tight end position. So, like, you need to overhaul the offense. If Cleveland tried This is the worst case scenario. You want to hear the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is Kevin Stefanski, for some reason, comes back for one more year. They give him one more season, and he says, you know what? I need to save my job. I'm going to go for a veteran stopgap quarterback. That is the worst case scenario for this team. Because that roster, that offensive roster needs to get overhauled. Like, it needs to, man. It's a bad roster. Young quarterback on a rookie contract, start to rebuild the trenches, start to rebuild the pass-catching group. That is why I think ultimately a young quarterback in the draft and being semi-aggressive for one, I think would be the best case scenario for this team, whoever the next head coach is as well.
The Jets, I think, are just simply the most obvious. They went all in on this OKC Thunder approach of just acquire as many picks as possible, see what you can do in terms of building up youth and trying to round things out in that regard. They just currently do not have anything that they can turn to and say we can be immediately competitive. Right. They don't. They have the advantage of the trades that they made of trying to use that draft capital to then move up if required. It kind of would suck if you traded away star players to get first-round picks and then have to waste those future first-round picks of just getting into position to draft a guy. It'd probably be best to pray and hope that you don't need to do that, but they're the most equipped capably of accomplishing it.
I think I have a take that you're going to hate. Are you ready for this take? So the New York Jets have 2 first-round picks in 2026, and they have 3 first-round selections in 2027, which was netted by the combination of Sauce Gardner and Quinton Williams trades, okay? I don't think I would be crazy aggressive in this draft for a quarterback. I think I would be aggressive if the price point was correct, but I don't think I would get desperate this year. And that is no disrespect to the quarterbacks in this class. I think I like Dante Moore a lot. I love the floor, of Fernando Mendoza, but I don't love the ceiling necessarily, Joe. I don't love the ceiling of Fernando Mendoza. I think Fernando Mendoza is Matt Ryan, Jared Goff, somewhere in that realm, and maybe not even Matt Ryan. Probably more in like the Jared Goff.
I mean, those are good. Well, Matt
Ryan was a very good quarterback. My point is that is he a guy that you're going to mortgage multiple first-round picks to go up and get to elevate your roster? I'm not really sure. I think. Well,
the problem is you've been a team that has failed comically at trying to find a quarterback. It's like, are we just going to really keep punting on this again?
I don't think you punt.
You got to take swings to try and find someone.
I guess my question is Fernando Mendoza a good enough quarterback for me to say I'm going to mortgage 3 first-round picks, including whatever their top 10 pick ends up being, to go up and get Fernando Mendoza at number 1? Is he a good enough quarterback for that is the question.
I think that obviously it's like a little bit more of a complicated question. Sure. And a larger one to debate. He's not a Andrew Luck type of a prospect that you need to like, oh my God, I need to go and get this kid. Like we have to, this will be franchise altering.
Right.
But I think if you ask a Jets fan, hey, would you like to have Jared Goff as your starting quarterback? They would probably say, yes, I would love to have somebody who's steady and reliable, that doesn't end up completely stinking. I think that they would like to have somebody that they could turn to and know is not going to. I know that he just played really poorly against the Vikings recently, but I feel like they'd much rather have something that is not a bottom 10 quarterback in the league. So to not have addressed this for this long, are you just punting on expecting to not compete for the next 2 years is essentially what if you wait to draft a quarterback in 2027, you're not going to be competitive in 2027. That then means you're not going to be a competitive team until 2028.
It's so circumstantial, and it's about your perspective on Fernando Mendoza. Like, I think that's what it comes down to, Joe, because like my thought process is this, okay? If the New York Jets see Fernando Mendoza, I'm just going to use him as an example. We can even throw Dante Moore into the conversation because we don't know exactly who's going to be QB1 in this class when all is said and done. If you look at either one of those kids and say that's a franchise-altering quarterback, or that's a guy that can do it for us, right? He's a train car type of quarterback and not a guy that's just going to kind of bring up the, he's not going to be pulled along. He's going to do the pulling, right? Mm-hmm. I think that I would be okay with taking that swing, obviously, right? Because if you think he's the guy, that's great. I'm saying when I look at Fernando Mendoza, I'm just going to keep using him as an example. I look at him and say, I think when things are really good around him or just good around him, I think he can make good better, right? Like I think that he can make bad better. I think he can make things better, but I do also question of, you remember when the Rams traded up to number 1 many moons ago to draft Jared Goff? What happened there? They weren't a good enough roster to support him, and he fails, right? And even though...
Yeah, but they went to a Super Bowl not long after.
And then what did they do as soon as they won the Super Bowl? A year after they won the Super Bowl, they jettisoned him and said, we need an actual quarterback that can actually win a Super Bowl. We need one that can win a Super Bowl.
Well, but then I would argue, though, that they wouldn't have been able to make the trade for Matthew Stafford had they not had a solid enough quarterback to include in that trade.
Sure, but if I drafted, if I traded up 2 to 3 first round,
having Jared Goff effectively won them a Super Bowl and has put them in this position to win a Super Bowl. So no, that's not an insane thing. He was good enough for them with the really good roster that they had to go to the Super Bowl when they lost to the Patriots
and to lose.
And then having him be solid enough was enough for him to be included in that trade package to go and get Matthew Stafford. So you need to have something before you can really take the full leap to the top.
So you want me to trade 2 to 3 first round picks to get a guy that's a trade bait eventually of a quarterback? That's what you're telling me right now. That's the example you just.
Well, is that not literally what the Rams did? Is that not literally what they traded up to go and get Jared Goff?
That wasn't their ideology when they drafted Jared Goff. They didn't say, you know what, if he's not good in a couple years, but he's okay enough, we're going to trade offload him. Like that was.
I understand that, but without the existence of Jared Goff and having gotten him, you would not have been on this trajectory of being one of the most competitive teams in the NFL over the last decade.
Speculation.
You wouldn't be as good as you are.
Speculation. It's just speculation.
I don't know who else you're plugging in at quarterback.
Anyway, I think I will conclude it by saying this, Joe. I'm not 100% sure that the Jets got these 5 first-round picks over the next 2 years to potentially be aggressive necessarily for Mendoza or more. Is it possible? Yes. If they do it, well, I'll even phrase it like this. If they do it, I won't say a word against it. If they think he's the guy, I will have an open mind and I will sit back and I will watch what happens. But I'm just not sure if either one of those guys is a player that I, in a vacuum, would like to trade 3 first-round picks to go up and get. Because it's probably what you're going to have to do if you're the Jets.
Speaking of the Rams, Ryan, they're in a very, very unique spot. And this has been like a really interesting talking point to have, because they're not holding their own first-round pick that's currently in the top 10. They hold the Atlanta Falcons' first-round pick for the trade that the Falcons orchestrated last year, in which they went and moved up to go and get James Pierce Jr. Now the Rams are in a spot to find their future quarterback that they could build around if they decided to move up. I personally think, and I know that you're trying to capitalize on a window of Matthew Stafford playing at an MVP level to go to multiple Super Bowls until he decides to call it quits. He's at the very end of his career. You have no idea how long that's going to be. Mm-hmm. I think that in a class where there's not very many good options, if you are enticed by Fernando Mendoza or Dante Moore, and you think that you can build your team around either of them and still find ways to produce and to succeed, I think it would behoove them to move up, only if they didn't have to move up into like the top 2 or 3. Say one of these guys slides a little bit, a draft night trade to move up to 5, whatever it might be. Getting a chance to have figured out your future while having your present is something that no franchise typically is able to have on the table for them.
Well, I think the general manager Les Snead, just in theory, he famously said, fuck those picks after they won the Super Bowl, right? Like, he doesn't care about first-round picks, or at least he didn't earlier in this Sean McVay tenure, obviously, a few years ago. So I don't think it's necessarily unprecedented that he would be aggressive in offloading first-round capital. But I do think that the ideology of the Rams, from what I've seen, Joe, as a fan over the years, is they are much more offloading draft capital for veterans, not really guys in the draft. Like, that hasn't really been their forte. Like, they usually move back, if anything, in the draft. They don't usually move up into the draft, right? So I know that there's an apples to orange conversation to a degree, because they haven't had a ton of draft capital in the past, and this is kind of a new thing for them. But I actually, I'm against it, just off the simple fact, it's not often that, because I personally think, I don't know your perspective on this, but I think although the Rams lost to Seattle last week, again, we're recording the week after Seattle, that even though they lost that game, I still think the Rams have an argument as the best team in the NFL right now, and a team that could win the Super Bowl this season. Like, they don't have a crazy amount of flaws. Like, they have a good offensive line. They have a quarterback playing at an MVP level. You have two good running backs. You have Puka Nacua, who's the best wide receiver in the NFL, and you have a very good defense under Chris Shula, even though it's had a little bit of leaks at times. But I do think that there's something to be said of preserving that winning window as long as possible, right? And then if there comes a time when Matt Stafford is off to the next venture in his life, I think the Rams are a team that could be aggressive at that point, and Les Snead has shown that he will be aggressive at that point, and Sean McVay has shown that he is open also to being aggressive at that point. When I look at this Rams team, with where they are picking at the back end of the top 10 with that Atlanta Falcons pick and then their own pick that's obviously going to be in the late 20s to early 30s, I do think that this is a team that you could preserve this winning window by taking a couple players that fill the very small amount of needs that you have on your roster. All you need to preserve this winning window is potentially another offensive lineman, potentially another cornerback. Other than that, though, you are set on the defensive line. You just signed Nate Landman to an extension at linebacker. Maybe you go after a safety, but you have a wide receiver, Puka Nacua, who's a legit MVP candidate himself. I think that this Ram team is so good and in such a good spot right now with Matthew Stafford. Although older, he's still 37 years old. So it's not like we're talking about a guy that's hitting 40 like some of these guys are nowadays. I think there's still a year or two left of Matt Stafford after this year. I think preserving that winning window and just filling a couple of the last needs with that draft capital, I think would be more beneficial than mortgaging those picks right now to go get a quarterback and waiting. That's kind of my thought process.
One of the things that could be kind of crazy for this, and this is a December conversation. As you say, I agree with you. I think that the Rams are the best team in the NFL right now. That loss that they suffered on Thursday Night Football derailed everything, but it doesn't mean that they still can't go on a run.
Too,
the team is
like, it was so so much of a fluky loss. So you're winning by 16 points with 9 minutes left, and then for 5 minutes straight, it was just like chaotic thing after chaotic thing. Like, it's just not replicable as far as losing that way every single week.
But to this point, there's a theoretical possibility that they could go and win a Super Bowl this year. They could win the Super Bowl this year, and I think that, personally, again, I think that they have the best chance of accomplishing that out of any team. They feel the least flawed. They've got the right momentum that would work in their favor. And for how old Matthew Stafford is and how well he played this year, he could be one of those guys that just straight up says, well, I'd like to end my career on top, and he could retire immediately after. It happens all the time in the NFL where guys at any position recognize, hey, if I keep trying to chase this and I come back next year and maybe physically I'm not the same guy, or X, Y, and Z thing happens in the offseason, we lose X, Y, and Z thing, maybe I would just like to feel like I left with everything being put out there on the field to produce the most hard to accomplish feat of winning a Super Bowl. So if Stafford retires, that is what is going to completely alter and change this decision, because then you kind of have to really sit there and go, all right, well, now we don't have anything. Are we a team that thinks that we could go and maybe turns Trey Lance into something, go turn Mac Jones into something, turn Kyler Murray into something, turn Tua into something? Those aren't exactly exciting options, and that could result more in a downturn than trying to invest in one of these youngsters with Fernando Mendoza and Dante Moore. I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers, though, Ryan, are an example of a team that did not effectively handle that transition with a premier veteran when they had Ben Roethlisberger. They were at the top, and big, fat, old Big Ben was still throwing for 400 yards in some instances, and then it just came all crashing down. You get Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph and all these nobodies that just couldn't play very well, and they're in the worst possible spot because they keep winning just enough to get to the playoffs or to be at least near there. And that means they're going to be picking in the 20s to potentially as high as like 25, whatever happens. To move up to find somebody is going to require ridiculous draft capital unless you think that you can get Ty Simpson, who they'd probably still need to go and trade up for. The Steelers are in the worst possible spot, and I think out of anybody, they need to stop piddling around with this. They need to find somebody young to build around. Otherwise, this is just going to be a continuous stopgap situation for veterans that do just enough and then struggle down the stretch, and they don't do enough to carry them to the playoffs.
Oh, a phrase that we used to talk about a lot in the old days, Joe, is quarterback purgatory. This is quarterback purgatory in Pittsburgh because you just keep recycling veterans, right? In terms of, you obviously you went out and got Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers is still playing good for a 42-year-old, obviously very good for a 42-year-old. But the point is that he doesn't have a runway of winning. He doesn't have a winning window that's applicable more than likely after this year. So you're a team, and I think there's a lot of the frustration from the Pittsburgh fan base with the Mike Tomlin right now is that Mike Tomlin is obviously a good coach, and he's a good enough coach where they're going to be picking in the 20s every single year. They're going to be making the playoffs every single year. But there is a conversation of stagnation at some point where it's like, guys, we're not actually getting any better. Like, we're staying exactly the same. So we're not bad enough to make an aggressive play for resetting the future, but we're also not good enough to win a Super Bowl. Like, that is where I read some stat, Joe, and don't quote me on this, but do you know the Steelers haven't won a playoff game since like 2017 or something like that? 2018?
And it makes sense because and every time that they play these games, their defense plays their asses off, and then whoever's at quarterback just completely plays like ass.
It's crazy, dude. So, I mean, they are in the toughest spot ever because, I mean, are you going to jump from 20-something to top 5? I mean, can you imagine the capital that you're going to have to give up? Like, you're probably going to have to offload a really good veteran on top of 3 first-round picks to even try to make some type of move like that happen. So, I mean, they're in a really, there is no team that is in a worse situation for the quarterback board having less depth than we thought it was going to have. As soon as Lenore Sellers goes back to school, as soon as John Mateer starts trending downward, as soon as Brandon Sorsby most likely opts for the portal and transfer elsewhere, the Steelers were the team that was maybe affected more than just about anybody in terms of options that were on the table. So should they be aggressive? Probably. But if we're being predictive, I think they're just going to try to recycle the next veteran quarterback. And I don't know who that guy is. Like, maybe that's a Geno Smith after the disastrous season he's had with the Raiders. I don't see them going after a guy like...
that's disgusting if that's what they're...
I don't see him going after a guy like Tua because Tua sucks in the cold. Like, why am I going to go and get a guy to bring him up to Pittsburgh?
Right.
You know, like they're such a tough spot. Maybe they're a Mac Jones team for a year. Like, I have no idea, but they are in a really bad spot from a program perspective, from an organizational perspective.
I'm still in favor of the Trey Lance reclamation project. Here's what I think that the best case scenario for you is. Yes, you're going to have to go find another veteran that's maybe not as a big of a name. Maybe that is Mac Jones, and see if you can bring him in. But you need to hope that Ty Simpson plays really well against Indiana.
Yeah.
And maybe someone's listening to this like a week after that game and going, uh-oh, or they're going, ha, he did. But you need Ty Simpson to finish the season well. He had a really solid game, in my opinion, against Oklahoma, where he kind of showed us the toughness against pressure and the big playmaking ability that we saw throughout the year. If he accomplishes that and he's worthy of a first-round pick, and I think that he still will be, I think some teams will talk themselves into it, hoping that he falls out of the top 10 and that you can trade up to like 12 and you don't need to completely bend over backwards to go and get somebody. I don't think it's unreasonable to think that you couldn't get a Bo Nix type of a season out of Ty Simpson in his first year in the NFL. I think that Bo Nix was highly impactful for the Broncos and then has taken a leap forward. And it hasn't exactly been a top 10 quarterback, but he's done just enough. You need somebody who does just enough. That's what they thought that they were getting with Kenny Pickett, but apparently he does absolutely nothing. You need to get somebody who just keeps the ship moving forward instead of whatever limited options there are in free agent. There just needs to be youth in the room. I feel like going for a veteran again is just going to continue extending this issue.
You know what's funny is you kind of took like one talking point I was going to have, Joe, because this is going to sound so negative, right? Like it's going to like everyone's going to listen to this and be like, Ryan's an asshole, and it's fine. Ryan is an asshole sometimes, but is Ty Simpson potentially what you thought you were getting in Kenny Pickett? If you're the Steelers, I mean, like he's the 20th overall selection, right? Mm-hmm. Ty Simpson's better than a better prospect than Kenny Pickett. Even though I'm not the biggest I'm not the biggest Ty Simpson fan of all time, but like I remember laughing when the Steelers drafted the hometown kid with the, and Kenny Pickett, the Pitt Panther, great, right? So it wouldn't be the worst move of all time, but I'm also, again, like I would not be excited about giving up too much capital in order to get him. I think one thing that you said is perfect is like it has to be in the right range. Like I'm not jumping from 22 to 10 because jumping up 12 picks, man, that's going to be a wild number. Like it's going to be a wild number. But if if Ty Simpson falls to like let's say 15. Would you give it a look? I mean, maybe, possibly.
Oh, yeah. That's when you go, all right, we got this thing sorted. Like, let's go get the kid. Like, let's just save ourselves.
But even that still feels like quarterback purgatory to me because it's like, again, Ty Simpson's better than probably the other options that are out there in free agency and maybe low-end trades that you're going to get if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. But is Ty Simpson so good that he's going to win a Super Bowl for you one day with the Pittsburgh Steelers? Probably not. So I would argue that you're going to continue staying in purgatory, but it's also something that I think that the Steelers might not need to do because they are in a weird spot of desperation, assuming that Aaron Rodgers is going after this year, which I would be surprised if Aaron Rodgers is not going after this year. Double negative there, but yeah.
All right. Last talking point that we're going to get to here in relation to quarterback situations. There's been a growing narrative for the New York Giants and how they should handle this upcoming offseason. There is, and some New York media have been pushing this, Colin Cowherd's been pushing this, it's been gaining steam that Jackson Dart, their current quarterback, should be traded if the Giants hold the first overall pick at the end of the season. Or even if they're in a position to draft a quarterback, they should trade Jackson Dart and they should select Dante Moore, or particularly Fernando Mendoza has been the one who's brought up with this. As somebody who's a Giants fan, as somebody who covers the Giants, I am completely against this. We have spent time talking about here. I mean, you quite literally have said Mendoza is a Jared Goff type prospect. That to me is not enough of a leap forward to consider moving on from Jackson Dart. If you are effectively in a position to draft somebody who is an otherworldly quarterback prospect, like an Andrew Luck, absolutely have the consideration, absolutely do your due diligence. My problem with this is that you finally have a kid who not only has shown massive big plays, high impact on putting this team in a position to compete, to potentially win games that you're not supposed to, with significant limitations, with a below average offensive line, no receivers to throw to because Malik Neighbors is hurt, a running back room that is depleted and only has two guys at the current moment because you lost Cam Scadaboo. There is not very much working for them, not to mention the fact that defense that can't stop anything. He is in one of the worst situations at the current moment for a rookie quarterback and still has found ways to produce. And he has the overall mentality that I think reflects a lot of how people in the region around New York City, how they feel, how they want to feel confident. They want to feel expressive. People are rallying around him. They weren't doing this with Daniel Jones. I just think that when you finally feel like you have a kid in the room, you have to see it through. We're not talking about a player who is been at a Kenny Pickett level, who has struggled, and you're thinking, all right, maybe let's see what happens here. It's been volatile because he has been through a lot. He had really big games at the start. He has struggled recently because Mike Kafka has completely mishandled the play calling and how they're using him. To burn this thing down before the kid gets going and you trade him away and he goes on to work somewhere else, I think that would be completely devastating. To make a move like that for someone who is going to be a slightly above average starter when you already have a guy who is capable of becoming that and is already a year into progressing into his career, I think that would be completely misguided.
The tough part of this conversation is there's going to be a new coaching staff in New York, obviously, right after Brian Daboll was let go this season. They're going to have some input into this, Joe, right? And if it's an NFL guy currently, which it most likely will be, they're going to look back at their notes on Jackson Dart coming out of the draft and say, I either liked this kid a lot or I didn't like this kid, right? And That's where a lot of determinations happen as far as does the staff believe in this player? Because here's the problem that happens sometimes, Joe. This happens sometimes. Sometimes a coaching staff gets hired, a la the Tennessee Titans a couple years ago, and they convince themselves, you know what? Will Levis showed us some flashes as a rookie. He had a couple good games, including a 4-touchdown game, where they're going to say, you know what?
Dart's been better than Will Levis,
Look at the stats,
man.
Dude. They're pretty similar.
Forget the stats. I've watched both of them play.
Will Levis
was also throwing to DeAndre Hopkins.
They're pretty similar, man. They're pretty similar.
I don't agree with that at all. I completely disagree with that.
The stats in a vacuum are pretty similar. My point, though, is my overall point is, if the staff doesn't believe in Jackson Dart, they don't believe in Jackson Dart. Like that's point blank. And we don't know the answer to that yet. There's a possibility that Joe Shane says, I'm looking for a guy that wants to work with Jackson Dart. That's a part of my criteria. But that's also flawed because Joe Shane could be out of a job sometime soon as well. So that should not be the overall point of the conversation. It should be about getting a guy in here that could save your job, a guy that can do a really good job. That's first and foremost. But overall, Joe, here's my baseline point here to this and why I believe this, that I would consider drafting a kid with the first overall pick if you have the first overall pick. If I threw Fernando Mendoza and I threw Dante Moore and I threw Jackson Dart in a bucket in terms of how I evaluated them as quarterbacks, and I could even inject what I know of Jackson Dart so far with the X amount of starts that he has in the NFL, who would you draft first?
I would still take Mendoza, but here's the thing, though. Yeah. The separation is marginal. And to be perfectly clear here, I, going into the 2025 NFL draft, was not high on Jackson Dart. And Jackson Dart's performance altered my perspective because the one problem that I had with him is I did not think that he was a capable decision maker of evaluating a full field and to move off of an initial he was one of the worst quarterbacks this past year and in the past couple of drafts in college of navigating off of a primary read to a secondary read. He made bad decisions. He held the ball too long. He hesitated. Completely different transformation for the beginning of his time with the Giants. Since the Kafka transition, you see the kid starting to overthink things again because Kafka's a really, he's a dunce. He just has no idea what he's doing. But Ryan, the difference between them is so marginal that it's not worth making a move like that. I don't think that anyone is going to evaluate all three of those guys and go, man, Dante Moore or man, Fernando Mendoza is just so much better than Dart that we have to pass up on it. Here's the other thing too, though. Yeah. Whoever they hire ultimately, and this has been reported upon since they fired Daboll, even before they fired Daboll, all these anonymous coaches that have been spoken to and reached out to, they've been asked, how enticing is the Giants' job? All of them have said it's the best job out there. There's a young quarterback with elite weapons and a quality defensive core that if you tap into it, it could be immediately competitive. A lot of the reason why these anonymous coaches like the Giants' job is because of Jackson Dart. So most realistically, whoever you hire isn't going to come with the sense of, I got to go get my guy. I think most of them are going to come in with the sense of, man, there's this kid that we can build around, and if we give him the right situation, he could end up being a great player.
And I'm sure that's probably what they will try to do. If you ask me today, what do I think they'll do? They'll probably roll with Jackson Dart and they'll trade back. Like, that's probably what they will do. But do I think that there's credence to thinking about if it's a new staff that evaluates Fernando Mendoza or Dante Moore and evaluates Jackson Dart both from Ole Miss and what they know now already in the NFL, and they see him in person, all that type of stuff, and they evaluate all three of those players and say, who would I rather work with? I think there is some credence to saying a new coach needs their guy, because ultimately, with the rookie pay scale the way it is, Joe, while you don't want two first-round quarterbacks on your roster necessarily, it's not like you're paying Jackson Dart big money like you were back in the day when you were paying like Sam Bradford, $50 million guaranteed as the number one draft pick. Like, it is different now. So you can afford to draft a quarterback number one, to have Jackson Dart be the backup and to pay him a low first-round paycheck at the quarterback position, because ultimately backup quarterbacks get nice paydays in the NFL, and they are not the guy that just don't get scraps. That they're not the third offensive guard on a roster, for instance, right? Like, they matter so much that you're going to get a decent amount of money. So again, I think that there is some credence to getting an offensive. Well, I didn't think it's necessarily an offensive-minded head coach. Getting a good head coach that you believe in and say, hey, we have these 3 guys that could potentially be on the table. One we already have, 2 guys that could be via the first overall selection. Which one do you believe in? And that's the answer in the end. If it's Fernando Mendoza, great. If it's Jackson Dart, fine. If it's Dante Moore, fine. There's no wrong answer if the coach believes in them, but I do think that it would be silly and misguided to not at least consider them all. Consider all the options are on the table.
Well, having the conversation is important, but the other layer that you're also, I think, removing from this too, what you can get in return for trading out of the first overall pick ultimately builds a better roster around Dart. Picking at that spot and trading Dart probably does not get you as much. I think that you would be able to, it's the mystery box fallacy that you can trick somebody into thinking, hey, like I can go up and go and get my future starter instead of I've seen this kid play before. The value is just higher.
Well, let me.
I think that the amount of capital that you could end up getting, to find new offensive linemen, wide receivers, defensive backs that you need, this team lacks depth.
Right.
That's the biggest problem right now. They have very poor depth because Joe Schoen did a terrible job on mid to late round picks. If you have more picks to go and get that depth, that then fixes the circumstance of your team.
Let me ask you,
and makes it easier for Dart to win.
Let me ask you one more question before we end this conversation, because obviously we see it a little bit differently, but it's totally fine. It's a healthy conversation. What if I told you, because the whole point of wanting to keep that pick and not draft a quarterback is you want to trade back, right? Like you don't want to sit at 1 and draft a wide receiver or Arvell Reese or whoever. Like you don't want to do that at number 1. But what if I told you, I guaranteed you, and I can't guarantee this, but let's say it's out there, that if you traded Jackson Dart, you can get a first-round pick from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Would that change your opinion on this at all? If you could fetch an additional first for Jackson Dart?
I don't think it would completely change my opinion. I think it would make the decision a little bit different because that's also what needs to be part of this. Is like if you're really going to go down this route, you need to find what the trade market is. If the trade market for someone moving up to your spot where you're picking is greater than sending away Jackson Dart, we have seen that there's more significant value just in the NFL of building a better circumstance around a kid than drafting the better prospect.
Right.
I mean, like we talked about Jared Goff earlier. Jared Goff has made himself look better because he's on a good team. Caleb Williams is on a better team now, so he's playing better. Drake May is a little different because Drake May is such an elite player that he elevated the team around him. That alters the discussion. The best young quarterbacks that play better early on are the ones that have the good roster with the good coach. So I think that we would have to know exactly what the value is of that of trading Dart.
I think it almost comes down to, would you rather have Jackson Dart and 2 first-round picks, or would you rather have Fernando Mendoza and 1 first-round pick? Like, what's the
Dart and 2 first-round picks?
Have that? Well, then there's your answer, right? Like, that's the teeter-totter conversation of like what side wins ultimately. If you would rather have Jackson Dart and 2 first-round picks, that ultimately wins. Or if you rather have Mendoza and 1 first-round pick if you trade Jackson Dart.
All right, everybody, that's going to be it from us. Hit that like button on today's video. Hit that subscribe button as well. And we'll talk to you next week.